Hi friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Jerry. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you've never been to my channel, welcome. My channel is dedicated to helping people go through a difficult time, and it's also dedicated to helping people find hope and purpose in the world that we live in today, because we live in a crazy, chaotic world that seems to be spinning faster and faster every single day. It's like everybody's always in a rush or something. And I'm the kind of person who it's just like, no, I need to slow down a little bit. I definitely like to take life at a little bit of a slower pace. I know I've been a little MIA this last month, but that's because I got really sick last month, but I'm here now and I am just working on recovering. So as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about this week, I started to think about recovery. Recovery is a huge thing that's been a part of my life. I think that when we look at our lives, we know that at some point in our life, we're going to experience pain. Like, nobody is free from not experiencing pain in their life. And sometimes we just have to know how to deal with that pain so that we don't live in misery. And what I mean by that is sometimes when we experience trauma in our life, we feel very, very overwhelmed. I was watching a video about a war veteran who had PTSD, and he described trauma as something that just makes you hyper aware of everything going on around you. Like, you become very, very aware and you pay attention to everything, but it's very unfocused and it's very overwhelming. And I definitely could agree with what he was saying, because sometimes when you experience trauma in your life and something it's so unexpected, you start paying attention to things you normally wouldn't have. And sometimes it's like sitting in your car and when you turn on your car and the radio is just blasting, but it's like that feeling like you can't turn the radio down and you can't turn the radio off, but you can't understand what the person is saying because they're speaking so loudly. It really, really affects your senses and the things going on around you. And while I personally cannot relate to the trauma that you are experiencing, I really, really hope that watching this video will give you a little glimpse into my trauma and how I managed it and how I dealt with it and how I navigated my life. And hopefully that will make you feel like you're not so alone, because sometimes after experiencing trauma, we can feel like we're alone completely. And it's not the case. There's a lot of people experiencing pain in this world. It's just that we live in a world that showcases everything so great online, in success, at work, at everything. But really, there are some deep wounds within people. And generally, the people who do notice that look on your face are the people who've experienced a similar kind of hurt. It might not even be remotely the same situation, but there is mercy and there is grace and there is compassion within people who've gone through a really hard time. And I think that's why it's so important for me to share some of my story, because I've overcome a lot of those things. And it took years. Don't get me wrong, these things take time. But if you have a little bit of light, if you feel like you can have a little sense of, okay, this is something I should do, then I hope you do it. And I hope that I can help you out in some kind of weird way. We look at addiction. I can't speak on addiction that's like ingrained within people, or people who don't have an off switch, in the sense that like it's just something ever since they had their first drink or something. It's like they weren't able to stop it. It's like going 100 miles per hour. I can only tell my story of going through a traumatic experience and then having an emotional drinking problem to cover up all the new things that I was experiencing in my life. But isn't a video just for people who've experienced addiction with alcohol. I mean, there's so many other addictions out there that we just overlook. You know, there could be people who have addictions to sex and feeling some kind of love, or money and frivolous spending and gambling. I mean, there's addictions to food. If you're feeling really, really depressed and you've gained a lot of weight after going through a traumatic experience, that's not, it is something that's normal. So a lot of people will think like, oh, well, really get down on themselves, thinking like they're not normal. And you are. You're just at a point where you might not feel like you know how to manage it. Because I didn't know how to manage what I was going through. When I went through trauma in 2013, I started having flashbacks. And I didn't even realize that was a thing that happened outside of the movies. I was sitting on my couch one day within the first month, and my heart started racing. Like, I literally thought I was having a heart attack. But really, it was just a panic attack. I couldn't manage my mind. I didn't know what to do. I tried to see a couple counselors, but it was a really bad experience for me. It was a lot of forcefulness to do things that I didn't want to do. And I didn't feel comfortable doing yet because I was still processing everything that was going on. Nobody can force you to deal with some of the things that you go through in trauma at their pace. It's got to be your own. And generally, I think it needs to come from somebody who has experienced something similar to you. Because that was the thing that got me to get sober, was somebody who had that compassion, somebody who had that mercy, because they had experienced the pain that I had experienced in a weird way, where like I looked at them and I was like, well, if they can do it, I can change my life, you know? So following the panic attacks, I started to get really, really, really bad anxiety. And I'd never had anxiety before. I didn't realize it was a real thing. And yes, it very much is a real thing. My symptoms of anxiety were I would get a really tight chest and felt like butterflies, like just flickering around. Or like I started doing these weird movements with my head. Like if a thought came to my mind that made me feel super uncomfortable, it would like jolt my head. Like it was one of those things where it's just like I just didn't feel comfortable having that thought. Or I clenched my jaw very tight. I would scratch my skin really intensely because I didn't know how to relieve it. So it got to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore. And I started numbing it out. And I started numbing it out with alcohol. But like I said, this could be any kind of addiction that has any kind of power or control over how it makes you feel. Like it's your instant gratification. It's the only thing that makes you happy. It's on your mind constantly. It is controlling your life. It is running your life, and you don't even know it. And I didn't realize that I was making alcohol my idol, something I was like worshiping. It was the only thing that made me feel better. It was the only thing that worked. At least that's what I thought. But it really wasn't. It was my blanket. It was the mask that I put on so I didn't have to deal with the emotions that anxiety was causing me to have. Because without it, you know, then I was hyper aware of the abandonment. I was hyper aware of the rejection and just anger and all the things that I was really experiencing underneath. And I didn't like feeling those things because I didn't know how to manage them. So I went 2 years of really, really just spiraling out of control. And I started labeling myself all these things like depressed, I'm an anxious, this is just who I am, this is how I'm always going to be, it's never going to change. I was very, very negative. And the only reason why I know that is because during the time I started to semi get sober, I started taking these video journals. So I actually watched myself in the really aggressive portion of where I was, and I watched myself transition into a sober person. And for me, it was very much an emotional problem. Anytime I was feeling any really intense emotions, I would want to numb it out. I got to the point where I was drinking every day. I was drinking mornings, I was drinking nights, I was drinking to get over my anxiety, which actually turned out to be withdrawals from alcohol because I was drinking so much. I was really just making a fool of myself, and I didn't want to live anymore. I remember I had somebody write me a letter, and they were basically like, don't say that you're sober if you're not. Because at that point, I started relapsing. I tried to get sober on my own, and I couldn't do it. And she basically was like, if you need help, that's fine. But if you don't change, you're going to die. And I think at that point, I realized I wasn't just hurting me. I was hurting the people around me, the people who actually wanted to help that I always kept turning away because I'm just like, you don't understand. And there were other people in my life that were telling me I deserved to be angry and that I should be mad and this and that. And I fed into that because that's what I wanted to hear. And what I didn't realize is all the character defects that I had that were underneath the surface of the drinking. You know, and that's something I wasn't ready to face. And it wasn't until somebody came in my life and they were basically like somebody who experienced a similar thing as me, or like they overcame that addiction portion, and I looked at them and I was like, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. So I started going to support group meetings. So that was like the number one thing that really helped me stay on track. And like I said, I know like at some point in your life, if you want your life to change, you're going to have to make a decision. Because pain is something that we will all experience in life. Every one of us will experience pain. But misery is a choice. Misery is a choice we make. And if we live in that misery, our life is going to be miserable. And it doesn't have to be. It can be better. You don't have to walk around with all the weight of this thing, this trauma on your back. You can find people who will want to help you chip that away, because you might not realize it, but if you spiral down that hole long enough, you're going to be sitting at rock bottom, and you might not even realize you're there because you deserve to be there. And it's like, I never knew how to feel the light at the end of the tunnel, and everybody wants to look for a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think the thing we often miss is that the light is through other people. And as a Christian, it's people showing the Jesus side of themselves to us. The compassion, the love, the grace, the want to help. Because they know that you're not all those labels that you listed yourself. Because when you believe that you're all those labels, that's what everybody else believes. And they want to be there to help you chip those things away. Like they're the people that become the light in your life, and they come over to your rock bottom and they bring a bunch of bricks, and you might be sitting on that riverbed side waiting to get to the other side of the river, the better side, but they're there to help you build that strong, sturdy foundation. So my biggest number one thing is find the people who do want to help you build that bridge, who do want to help you overcome, who do want to help you get better, because they'll be there. They'll be your 911 people. I had a lot of 911 people. It's the people who don't turn away your phone call. It's the people who see you calling and they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they'll answer the phone. I had a lot of those people. And it was really nice to have that support. Because sometimes without it, it can be very overwhelming, especially when you're having triggers to want to do the thing that you shouldn't be doing, the thing that's masking the pain that you're trying to work on. And for me, it was like emotional triggers. If I was feeling angry, because that was one of my character defects, that was something that was brought to the surface when I got sober. I'm like, wow, I'm a really angry person with a foul mouth. I need to work on that. And it was things like that where it's like I needed people there to support me and help me get through that time. You know, sometimes we have to humble ourselves in life and realize we can't just do everything by ourselves. And we shouldn't want to do everything by ourselves. We do need other people to get through this life, whether you believe it or not. And sometimes when you go through that that experience, that hard experience in your life, you start to get more mercy. You start to have compassion. You start to have grace for people. Because when you can work on your own character defects, the things that are not so great within yourself, you can start to see those little things within other people. You can go, okay, well, they're kind of hurting. I really want to help them through this time. And therefore, it makes you way more confident when you can start to recognize the things that are not perfect within you. And you start to work on those things because you can start to see other people's character and go, that wasn't them talking to me in that way. They're not trying to hurt me. It's just they're hurting. And, hurt people hurt people. There's that saying, So during that time, the second biggest thing that helped me get sober and helped me re-navigate my path was video journaling. Because I wasn't going to therapy, I don't want to say I became my own therapist, but I did start talking about things with myself that I didn't want to talk about with anybody else. Because I had a really hard time speaking up during that time. I didn't necessarily want to tell people what was going on inside my head. I was very embarrassed of everything that I was going through and the way I was thinking. So I just spent a lot of time listening. And so I would come home and I would video journal if I had something on my mind. And the interesting thing about making video journals is you start to see progress. It's like people who go to the gym and they take progress pictures. They might not notice any change after a month, but if they continuously keep going, you start to see these small changes, and it's good. And it's motivating. It helps you get to the next big change that you can make within yourself. Because believe it or not, suffering is something that we'll all go through, but suffering also produces endurance. And endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope is something we need to get through this life. So I started taking these video journals, and I started to see that I was a pretty codependent person. So I made it a point to start to make goals for myself. I started to become more independent. I started to go to movies by myself. I found hobbies like longboarding. I found painting, spray painting, and just doing things on my own because I knew that I needed to build that part of my life and that I didn't want to rely on other people in the sense that that is what would fill my cup. I needed to be working on what would fill my own cup. And that's really what I was learning in the support group. I would always find people that I found to be very admirable, and I would strive to have qualities like them. So I started to see the things in people that I wanted to be more like. So I would ask questions, and I would start to look into more of that stuff, and I really started to change a lot about myself because I now had the time to do it because I wasn't spending most of my time being completely oblivious to whatever was going on around me because I was drunk. But I knew that I had to work on being a little more confrontational because I was a very non-confrontational person, and I think that's something that caused me to have a lot of low self-esteem because I wasn't able to stand up for myself, or when people would label me certain things, I was never able to correct them. So that's something I definitely started working on, and I started to see my self-esteem get better. I think the biggest thing for me about eliminating the thing that had the most control over my life was that I had to see myself as I was in that moment, which was very negative, and I had to start treating myself better. So when I took away that thing, and I would either think about that thing or think about, whatever kind of bad thoughts, I realized that I had to change that habit. I had to intercede the thoughts. I had to re-navigate my brain, because if I was going to change, I was going to do it the right way. I was going to stop being the way that I was being. So if you're feeling like you're sitting in this place of an addiction that causes you to feel a lot of pain, but temporary happiness, and when you strip that away, and you have those like thoughts and feelings about yourself, because I definitely had them. I watched a lot of videos of myself crying about, like I was having a really, really hard time with insomnia, and I was sitting in loneliness a lot. And I remember saying to myself in one of those videos, I'm like, I think this is what growth is. And it was. I was really, really growing because I was changing my habit. I was changing my behavior. I wasn't like going back to things that made me feel so sad. So it's interceding those thoughts so that you can have better ones. You can have a more positive life experience, but it does take work. And there is, like I said, some suffering in that. But when you can get through that night, when you can get through that day, the endurance builds and builds and builds, and it becomes more of a normal routine. For me, I had to figure out how to take care of my mental health, which the video journals helped with that a lot as well. And surrounding myself with more positive people, and people who wanted better for me. But it was also going to the gym for me, because the interesting thing about the gym is that it gave me the same sensation as me scratching my skin. When I was trying to relieve that anxiety, I was scratching my skin a lot. But when I went to the gym, it was like I was taking out all of that frustration, and it became like maintenance for my anxiety. I actually have really low anxiety now because of it. And it was something that I had to learn about from the ground up, and I just gave myself grace through the process of it all. Because, I mean, if you have any setbacks or failures, and you look at anybody with any level of success, and you tell me that they don't have any kind of failures or setbacks that before they got to where they are, then you'd be lying, because everybody has setbacks and failures. So we can't look at those as a need to go back to the way we were living. We just have to move forward, and we have to get through them, because our life is going forward. It's not going backward. We're not living in the past. We're going forward. And so the gym was one of those places for me where I had to learn from the ground up how to do it. And, if I skipped out on it or I wasn't doing well on it, I never punished myself for it. I mean, I probably did. I probably was mad at myself, but I always remember hearing this person say, I don't know, it was like some girl who was like a fitness influencer or something, and she just said, if you screw up one day, don't look back on the day like you're a failure. Just move forward the next day and try again. And that's what you have to do when it comes to sobering yourself from something. It's like any level of success that you want is going to have to be that way, where you can't focus on your failures and your setbacks. And I know that's going to be a little bit difficult in the beginning because you're so used to hyper focusing on those failures and those setbacks. But you got to re-navigate your brain. And so when I started to see changes within myself, I started to grow more confidence. I started to become more emotionally stable, and I was starting to build my character to the point where I didn't look at my life as I failed in any area. Like, I wasn't growing a career. I was really just trying to figure out how to manage my anxiety in my life at that time. But I look back over the course of that time in my life, and I'm like, I built my character so much. And I would much rather have a decent, good character than a level of success. I don't mind that I didn't grow a career. I'm more so happy that I was able to really focus on my character and put everything else aside and focus on what I needed to do to get healthy. After 3 years of getting to a point where I felt like I was very mentally stable, where I had changed my life and I changed my behaviors, I decided to have a drink again. And I was with somebody I trusted and I knew didn't have a problem. And to my surprise, it was fine. I didn't latch onto it. I didn't start drinking every day. I rarely drink now. And it was just something that I was very, very happy that I had gotten to the point with that thing that it no longer had control over me. It no longer had power to run my life. Like, I very much had control over it. But with that being said, I'm going to be honest and say, like, sometimes people don't have an off switch. And testing the waters might not be a good decision. But I do want to be honest with you about myself and my journey and how I went from being a person who went through incredible trauma to being somebody who learned to overcome. So if you don't think that your life can get any better, and if you feel like you're not an overcomer, like, quit telling yourself those lies, because you are. You can get through it. You can change your life. Things can be different. You just have to do the work. Sometimes work is not the fun part, but it is a journey to self-discovery. You'll discover so many things about yourself that you never really even realized, and people will see it within you. And it's a really beautiful thing. And if you are a person who is going through recovery and you're getting through it, and people are saying things, because that's the other part, is like, when you are in recovery, the things that people say might not be the most positive, or they might not understand. Or when I wasn't drinking, I remember people just being like, well, you have a problem? I'm like, well, yeah, but it's not something I want to talk to you about. Like, people will say things, and it can be very hurtful. Or like, you know, if you have an issue with an eating disorder and you're going to a restaurant and you're trying to change things around and people say something to you, you're just like, can you just mind your business? So if I can give any advice for those in recovery and those around people in recovery, it's just be very gentle with your words and what you say to people, because what you say can hit the wrong spot, because people who are in recovery are in a little bit more of a vulnerable state. And they, at least I was. And I got to the point where I grew a pretty aggressive backbone. And sometimes that just takes time. So please feel free to share this video. It could make all the difference. Bye.